Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live episode of To the Moon, Allison, our first in 2023. So happy New Year. And here we talk about the top and trending works in science fiction, speculative fiction, fantasy, and romance. I'm your host, Allison Martine Hubbard, author of the rom-com series, The Bourbon books and works of speculative fiction. I am so thrilled today to be joined by LIZ BOWERY, author of Love, Hate, and Clickbait. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you for having me.
Liz, I'm so happy to talk about your book today, which it's not quite a new release, but it came out last year. 2022 was last year already, and I'm still kind of not catching up to that, but it's still relatively new. It's super on zeitgeist in so many ways with the social media and the political campaigns and all of these things. But the fact that it's not a new release means none of you have an excuse for having not gone and read the book between the time I announced I was interviewing Liz and today. So there will be a quiz at the end of the show, not for Liz. She wrote the book. I'm kidding. And I also promised I would not do this deposition style. I have not practiced in over a decade. I resigned from the legal world when my eldest was, in utero. My mother was dying of cancer and I was pregnant, and it was a fun time. And I haven't practiced since then. So I couldn't do a deposition if I tried. But I did not know this when I read the book. But Liz is also a lawyer turned author. We are a rare breed. We are a weird breed. But I think I loved how you worked all this in. And no, the characters are not lawyers, but they might as well be, because we've got politics and a political campaign. And Liz, tell us just a little bit about Love, Hate, and Clickbait.
So Love, Hate, and Clickbait is a contemporary queer rom-com. It is set on a political campaign. It's a political primary. The book doesn't explicitly say this, but the characters are all Democrats. So there's it's set in a fictitious political universe. So there's like no Trumpism at all, but there's also really
Don't we all wish we could live in that fictitious universe?
Yes. I'd like to say that sometimes the book lives in the political universe of like 2014.
Oh yeah, I could see that.
Smudged to be today. But yeah, so it's set in a political campaign, and essentially the characters are staffers who their candidate makes a gaffe that makes it seem like she is homophobic. And so she asks the two staffers to pretend to date. They're both men. There's a lot more kind of convoluted series of events that leads to this happening, but essentially they have to fake date for the benefit of their campaign, because their relationship ends up being kind of something of a boon for their campaign. They get very popular online. And so it's, as all fake dating stories go, they have to pretend to date and then they fall in love.
Well, and I love it because you've got the fake dating and the enemies to lovers, because I will be honest here. Like I said, I picked this book up because the title was amazing. And I thought, okay, I love rom-coms. I write rom-coms. I would love to read this. And I hated these men so much. I was like this close. I'm like, okay, she's doing this for character growth. You've got to have room for them to grow. But I cannot remember the last time I hated men more when they started. And since it's both guys, they're both guys I hate. I had reasons to hate both these men and wanted to just lock them in separate rooms and give them no supper and say, bad boys, I don't want to deal with you anymore. But they grew on me. They grew on each other. All this stuff. But I did love that, because you got two guys, how physical they were right away with how much they hated each other. And in men and women ones, you can't have one of them, physically assaulting the other and not be a big old thing.
Yeah, we could talk for hours about like the way that something queer romance offers that I think is a big reason it appeals to a lot of straight readers too, is that it kind of takes gender out of the equation, because for exactly the reason you're saying, like if you're interested in the love story where maybe they do get, it's not like anyone's like actually physically abusing anyone, but where they get a little physical, it's a whole other minefield when you do that with a heterosexual relationship. So
even just getting in somebody's face when you've got a power differential, and these are both basically large guys who are not necessarily one's bigger than the other and intimidating. They're just pissed. And I love how the height of passion in one way has to lead to a height of passion in other ways, which you just handled so beautifully, because so many of the fake dating stories and the enemies to lovers, you don't really believe the enemies part. You think there's always a little something there. There was nothing there to start. There was just, these guys are going to murder each other if they're left alone. So let's hope there's somebody supervising, like the governor.
The Governor Westwood.
The governor. And I loved the governor in that she was someone who meant well and just kept doing wrong over and over and over. And you know what?
She means well.
Right. And she means well as in doing well for herself. She means to do well for herself. She's not intentionally saying really stupid things in order to sabotage her own campaign. Because honestly, the biggest problem with her campaign is her. So there is that. But can you tell us a little bit about our two male leads? We've got Clay and Tom. Yes. And at first I was getting pictures based on my pre-existing stereotypes, and then you knocked both those out of the way. So tell us a little bit about the guys and where they were inspired by or from.
Yeah. So Tom is sort of your classic, like, ice cold manipulator, political pro. He's charming. He's very handsome.
So slick.
Very slick, and just like wants nothing more in life than to be famous and powerful and feared and respected. Very, shallow and very cruel in a lot of ways. And Clay is the guy who thinks he is also like that and is not. Really thinks he's slick, really thinks he's clever, and is more of a doofus. He's like, I called him once like a cinnamon roll that's like good enough for the world. He's like, okay.
He's maybe not a cinnamon roll. He's more like a bagel.
Yeah, right. He's a bagel.
He might have some blueberries in there, but he's kind of a bagel at times.
People like bagels. Yeah. So that's Clay, and he's more of a doofus, and he really kind of wants to be like Tom. He has found himself. He was in the tech world before he got into politics. Sort of ended up on the wrong side of the folks that he was working with there. Got kind of exiled from the company that he helped found, and now is sort of seeking like a second act in politics. And really wants to prove himself and thinks he's like Tom. So I was really interested in that dynamic of kind of, someone who's utterly heartless and then someone who thinks they are, and how they might both shift away from that. A lot of people hate Tom and Clay, especially Tom when they start the book.
I was going to say, especially Tom, because when Clay starts, he's this, like you said, he's kind of a doofus, and he thinks he's doing the awesome things. He thinks he's the powerful guy. He thinks he's the smart guy, but that's really not who he is. Yeah. And reading his backstory was way more heartbreaking, and I felt softening for him a lot more quickly. Whereas the scene you start with Tom made me want to go and throttle that man so badly, because it does start with a wedding and it does not involve Clay, and I won't say more than that, but how heartless and calculating he is, and just how he uses people is just so gross that I'm just like, this man. And then you met and made me love him too. So I don't know what kind of witchcraft you did there, Liz, to make us care about them and care about them as individuals and them together. But I've never seen such a redemption arc for just a bastard, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I will say, so originally, if this might shock you, but the wedding scene was actually worse. Like, Tom was even meaner in the wedding scene, and my agent—
How could you make it worse?
Well, we don't want to spoil anything, but he was even meaner. And my agent editor made me pare it back. But yeah, I mean, I feel like that is maybe something that I get a lot from like historical romance novels. I feel like a lot of historical romance novels open with the male lead doing something just dastardly. And I guess it didn't occur to me that people would be so like about Tom, because I'm like, but shouldn't that tell you that like, this guy, he's gonna fall in love and he's gonna feel like such a jerk for being that's the joy of those kind of stories. You're like, oh, you know what you need to fall in love.
We're like, we gotta break that heart of stone and make you the sweetest guy, and you did, but I think that there is also something about just the user aspect of it that, especially then leading into a fake romance, because we knew that was coming too, just from the blurb, that knowing somebody who's so using, and there's a line, I'm gonna botch it, but someone tells Tom early on that he's not the one who's going to get hurt from all this, that when something goes bad here, and we all know something will, because that's just how these things go, he'll be fine. And then at some point we realize there is a heart under all of that, suave packaging and the fancy ties and the cufflinks and all that. And then we actually have to care about him. It's like, how dare you? I wanted to keep hating him for the whole time.
Yeah. It's and then, I mean, we don't have to get too much. Are we trying not to spoil the book?
I don't want to spoil the book, but I do want to let people know, just as far as, we've got a male romance, and the gaffe that starts everything is one that comes across as homophobic. So one thing that we should put out is that, okay, so Clay, at least at the start, his sexuality isn't really discussed, but he is out. Yeah. And Tom his sexuality is pragmatism. Like if that's his sexuality, that he's not like opposed to being in a relationship with a male, but he hasn't been in one before. The wedding that he walks away from, he was with a girlfriend. So there's that aspect too of him having to explore his sexuality beyond, hey, love wasn't really something he was interested in. It was all about how he could further his political career.
Yeah. He I think it's fair to say that at the start of the book, he thinks he's straight. And that's something that, I mean, I drew specifically from my own life, because I think when you're bisexual or pan, or when you experience attraction to more than one gender, including the one you're supposed to, it's really easy to not notice. I mean, maybe that's not the experience of every bi person out there, but, you know, I didn't realize I was bi until I was 16, which is much younger than Tom. But, you know, I think it's something that I found, you know, I was like, yeah, I can see that. I can see if you just are attracted to women, you're like, you know,
like I never have to look that way because the one that everyone in society is telling me I should be with is there, and therefore I'm fulfilling all these check marks. And with Tom's background, we don't get into it too much, but there is definitely some of his own upbringing kind of forcing that into a certain direction, where if he would have been, hey, I'm with a man, that may not have been socially acceptable early on for him. So even if his eyes did go that direction, he might have been, oh yeah, okay, I'll go this way. Okay, and Terry's adding that he thought he was bi until he's 16, realized he was gay. Terry, we are very, very glad that you realized who you were early on, and so is your lovely husband Ken. I'm hoping you're out of the tube by the time you're doing this. Terry's in London, so last time we talked, he was sending us crazy pictures of him on the tube, I think traumatizing strangers in London. But yeah, I mean, I think sexuality is something that I've known a lot of adults who realized they were ace, or that they were gay, or they were bi, because wherever you grow up, that's whatever is considered normal. And I think that's changing now, that kids younger and younger are realizing who they are, mostly because they see there are more choices. It's not something that's just black and white, gay or straight. It's whoever you are, and you've got to figure that out for yourself. And kids also mature at different rates. So I don't think 16 is terribly late, because I think a lot of people don't have any attraction really until that point anyway. Like one of my friends in high school, her attraction was to animated characters until she was a little older. Like, we'd like to get you towards people.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's some hot animated characters.
Hers was Aladdin. So
it is. Well, okay, see, Aladdin's got the best with his chest showing. I mean, you know, Jessica Rabbit was, in retrospect, like, it's so funny also, like when you come out later in life, not later in life, whenever you verbalize to yourself, oh, I'm attracted to, you know, like people of the opposite or the same sex, you kind of can then go back and like things make sense in retrospect. And Jessica Rabbit. Yeah,
I can totally see the Jessica Rabbit. I mean, she's just drawn that way. And so are you. And that's fine. And I think Terry is not agreeing with the Aladdin thing. That's fine, Terry. He doesn't have to be your type. We've also discovered our types don't cross very much. So that's fine. But it wasn't me who was attracted to Aladdin, just clarifying that. This was a friend. I won't name drop her, because if she's watching later, she'll yell at me. But I did love all the political meanderings going on in this thing. And the fact that you said it's a primary. So just getting back to what you said, these are both Democrats. So I love that you took, honestly, the politics and any kind of dogma out of this. So it wasn't like this side is the side of moral right and this side is wrong. It's more about who's playing the game in what way, and how is the game helping people or hurting people. And you have, I wouldn't say it's a subplot, but one of the characters who's kind of a smaller character is someone who's looking for student loan forgiveness. And I read that and went, can that be a real California law, please? And then I remembered you were writing a fictional book in a fictional California, and our governor is not your fictional governor.
Yeah. I mean, there's not a lot of Republican versus Democrat politics in the book, but I think there is some political right and wrong in the book. I mean, you know, because that plot that you point out is kind of, it's about like, how much can you sacrifice to pass a good bill? And when does it cross the line from being a good bill that has things in it that we want, but also for the sake of getting it passed, we're going to have to add these earmarks or these giveaways or stuff just to grease the wheels and get it through. Like, at what point does it tip and become not a good thing anymore?
Exactly.
Which I think is like a really something we'll probably be debating forever. You know, it's just kind of like a constant struggle. But, you know, of course, in the book, again, I don't want to spoil too much, but like it reflects the personal growth of one of the characters.
Like, oh, wait a second. What am I willing to do to get this accomplished? Not just in terms of what's in the bill, but what kind of tactics are being used, and who are we willing to sacrifice for what we call the greater good, and whose greater good is that really? Like, greater good for corporations or greater good for individual people who might donate money, and then where can that money go? So it isn't just a black and white issue there either. It is a matter of like, okay, well, what are we willing to do, and where are those personal moral lines drawn? And I loved how you handled it, because I felt like it was very realistic, and it wasn't ever heavy-handed, and it wasn't ever like, oh, here's this fake thing that could never really happen. Because I've read enough books, and we were talking just before we went live about movies or books where they handle something that clearly whoever wrote it either isn't that familiar with how things really work, or thinks that the people watching aren't really familiar with how things work. Because I recently watched a movie where the character was being called by, I don't know if it was her publisher or what, but saying, hey, you need to get this book done because the book's coming out. I'm thinking, the book's coming out in a couple of weeks and it's not done? That is not how at least traditional publishing works, let alone most reputable smaller presses don't handle things that way. Yeah. So how did that work? And I could never figure out whether one of the other characters was her publisher, her publicist, her agent, all of these in one.
Manager, her editor.
I didn't know, but I think they figured, oh, people don't want to know all those specific things. They just want to see Sandra Bullock run around in a skin tight dress in the jungle, which honestly, that's why most people tuned in. But I was yelling at the screen. My husband was like, okay, we get it. This is not accurate. I'm like, but it's really inaccurate. And I was really bothered by that.
Yeah. But, yeah, you also don't see a ton of, there was like a lot in that movie. We're talking about the Sandra Bullock, Channing Tatum book.
I cannot remember the name of that.
The movie. Jungle, The Lost City, something like that.
And she's a rom-com author or romantic adventure author, and channel changer. We just call him channel changer. Is the love interest of sorts, and he goes to save her when she's kidnapped by Daniel Radcliffe. For reasons.
And he's I love Dan Radcliffe. Channing Tatum is her cover model, and they sent her on tour with her cover model, and I was like, that also doesn't really happen. I'm not saying it couldn't.
I have been to a love and romance convention as a rom-com author with indie authors primarily, and they did have the cover models there going around, but I have drinks on my cover. I mean, I did have bourbon on my table. It was just bottles. So I guess I kind of had mine too, but they weren't signing autographs because they're bottles. But yeah, the guys are there and people are like, oh, look, pretty men. And none of them were my type. So I was like, that's nice. Keep moving, guys. Move along.
Fair enough.
But I think the idea of like a best-selling author having their cover model with them, that seems a bit of a stretch.
I had never heard of an event of an author with her cover model, but
Yeah, but I will say yours has the very classic rom-com cover style with the artist rendition. So yours would be cartoons. Mm-hmm. So that would be a little awkward if you somehow had cartoons walking around like little hand puppets. Yeah. These are my cover models. Here they are, Clay and Tom.
But it would be cool to do a panel with the artists who draw romance.
Okay,
covers. I'm sure
that's a totally different situation. Yeah. That would be amazing. And asking them like, hey, what have you drawn? Because I'm sure they've drawn a lot of other covers. You have all the authors whose characters they've drawn and brought to life, and then them saying, yes, I made all your people real. Well, and one of the things we were talking about inaccuracies, but your book is set in California and you grew up in California. So you handled California pretty well. And you were pointing out that some people hadn't noticed certain California inaccuracies. And one of them you pointed out before the show and I laughed at was one of the characters lives in a basement apartment in California. Yes. We don't have basements.
Yes.
A, earthquakes. And B, we've got sprawling land and then other places we're all packed together, but we don't really do that. And I don't know if it's mostly just because of the earthquake part, because that's kind of a big thing here. But I understood you were saying it's a bigger thing in Washington. I think of it as a New York thing because I have friends who live in basement apartments in New York.
Yeah.
But it's definitely more of an East Coast thing. But were there other things about the California part that you drew from imagination more than reality?
That was like the big one that always stood out to me is I was like, someone's going to call me out on the fact that LA doesn't have basement apartments. It's such a ubiquitous DC thing, especially if you're like a young up and coming like staffer that can't afford like a bigger place, that I was like, I'll just put it in because it gives the book a political feel of being DC, even if it's not whatever. I really don't care about like factual inaccuracies in my books.
Well, and it is funny because I've had people get upset because like my first book is set in Austin, Texas, in a hotel that is intentionally designed to be really ubiquitous, to be anywhere. And somebody in a review was like, she didn't showcase Austin as much as I wanted it to because she's from Austin. I'm like, okay, well, I'm glad I didn't write a tour guide because that wasn't what the book was about. But people are like, hey, you used the name of my place and now you didn't do it exactly how it is in my head. And now I'm mad.
Yeah, and my book is not like a loving tour of Los Angeles. It's not one of those books where you're like, oh, Los Angeles is like the third main character. It's just not as, it's so funny. You become an author and it's like you realize that like people are going to come to your book with such preconceptions of what they want it to be. And some people get so mad when it's not that thing. And you're just like, what can you do? I mean, it's not,
I didn't do that. But I loved your guys though, because as far as any kind of preconceptions about the guys, I will say that Clay's character bears a very slight resemblance to certain people that are in the media as far as like tech guys or tech bros. And I love how you kind of start there and then immediately start backtracking from that. So it gives us something to start from as an easy way to grasp who this character is. Like, I love how there's somebody cheering and he assumes it's for him. Yeah. I just love that. Like only certain kinds of people would hear cheering without ever being addressed and just be like, yes, you're welcome.
Yeah, that's like a really crucial part of Clay's personality as the book starts. Yeah, I mean, he liked coding as a kid. He kind of grew up and sort of went in that direction, but he's not, what he wants is validation. What he wants is to feel cool and admired and stuff. And so he was looking for that in Silicon Valley. Now he's looking for that in politics. But it's not so much like the actual, substance matter that he's as interested in. Although he develops, there's kind of a subplot in the book where he ends up developing like he codes a software program that might be of help to the campaign, and that like it kind of becomes a thing. But
well, I liked that they weren't similar types of guys in terms of their interests, both politically versus technologically, but also even what they did in their off time, because as the book goes on, they do spend time together outside of the office. And I was laughing so much at like the game you came up with. I had to ask my husband, is this a real game? Can you tell us about the video game that Clay plays? And if it isn't a real game, because he says it's not, can you please go pitch that somewhere? Because I want to play that game.
I would love to play it. Yeah, I wanted it to be like stupid. So what I came up
with, I loved it.
Yeah, it's a World War II game and it's very gritty, but the characters are donuts instead of people.
Battle of the Bulge.
Battle of the Bulge, right. My editor was like, can we say this? I think there's already a game called Battle of the Bulge. And I was like, I think it's fine.
I'm sure
it's a real battle in World War II.
It's a real battle. I don't know if it's a real game. And even if it is, you clearly made it different by the fact that you made the characters donuts. So I'm picturing like, I don't know if you've seen Wreck-It Ralph, but when they're in the rush, those kind of things, and the donuts with the faces on them, and they're like, die, and they're donuts. And then, of course, watching it makes you kind of hungry. And I just feel like this is the kind of game you'd want to play really high and then just have a bunch.
And just have like this pile of donuts next to you.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I love the donut in Wreck-It Ralph. The cop has like 4 little sprinkles here as his little mustache. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's perfect. I mean, the fact that like my middle child, when she doesn't comb her hair, she looks like Vanellope von Schweetz with like, are there things stuck in your hair now, kid? I don't really know. Those are sprinklers. Are they supposed to be sprinkles in your hair? Because I don't think I fed you sprinkles recently, so we should probably comb your hair, just as a thought. But I did laugh at that because that's so not who Tom is, and he's just having the hardest time watching that. And just even how that fits so many relationships, because so many people, it's like one of them's the big gamer and the other one's like, why are you wasting your time doing that? How stupid.
Yep.
But I wanted to know, like, where did you get the ideas for these characters to start? Like, did you know, I want this character, these characters, and then the setting, or did you have the setting and then figure out who are the right guys to plug in here?
I think the setting and the characters kind of came to me. Well, I mean, yeah, the setting and the characters came to me at the same time. It just occurred to me that fake dating would be an amazing trope to use in a political setting, because it's all, I think the best fake dating stories do take place in some sort of like a world in which artifice and artificiality are already so much a part of it. Like I just finished reading Ava Wilder's book, How to Fake It in Hollywood, which is a fake dating book in LA and Hollywood. And, it's a similar kind of thing. It's like so much of celebrity culture. You're like, what's real and what's not. And I thought, I've always loved like political fiction, like West Wing, V, Parks and Rec, like House of Cards, all those kind of things. And I thought like, oh, this would be the perfect setting. And everything kind of fell into place with that, because I thought, well, okay, if we're doing a fake dating relationship in this world where artificiality is such a live issue, then you would want the characters to be really emblematic of that. And in a lot of ways, I think Tom's kind of the main character, and he's the one who is so obsessed with kind of being empty inside. I mean, he sees that as like a good thing because he can't ever be hurt. And so that was kind of the main thing that I wanted to like play off of. And that's where the idea came. Yeah.
Well, and when you said like the Hollywood thing, that's absolutely true, because you go back to the old Hollywood time when people would say basically the studios are telling you who to date and who you should be seen with. And even now you hear about like, oh, was this a real thing, or was this just part of the press tour to show promo? And that's where you get into the whole social media aspect. So like I would say the third character in this book was social media, was Instagram, because they were constantly curating stories and staging events even to be seen at, so that even not just on their Instagram, but they're showing up on other people's Instagrams as this couple together. And what does that mean? And what does that mean for the campaign to have these people there? Which is so funny, because the idea that this couple working for a politician somehow translates to her candidacy is kind of an absurd concept. And yet we do that kind of thing all the time. And it blows my mind, honestly.
Yeah, I got so many people being like, this is not realistic. And I'm just like, have you seen the people that the internet obsesses over? I mean, like, I don't watch ice skating. I don't watch any sports really, but like, I know who like Tessa Moir, I don't know her name, but I know that ice dancing couple that did the Moulin Rouge dance, and I ship them. So, you know,
like I ship anything Moulin Rouge related.
Well, that's true. Yeah, I mean, you know, I would totally buy that these guys could become, you know, I'm sure they would not be at like, whatever, like the level of fame that follows like Taylor Swift and whoever she's dating, but like, yeah, a sizable, especially in like the political press, people who are already kind of like obsessively following politics. I was like, yeah, people would be into that.
Yeah, no, I can totally see that, especially if it comes on the heels of like, hey, this person is seen as being not supportive of the LGBTQ community. And now, oh, they have staffers who are in prominent positions. And hey, if they're in these prominent positions, they must be somehow informing the policy decisions, etc. But for anybody who says, oh, people aren't that obsessed with it, it's like, do you know how much my Twitter feed talked about like Olivia Wilde and salad dressing? And I'm just like, I'm so confused by all of this, and I really don't care. But my Twitter feed is just showing me this anyway, as if I do. So I mean, I believe it could, and especially depending on what's going on in the political cycle. So like you're getting into primaries, I can totally see that. We're getting stuff all the time about certain politicians who claim to be of ethnicities or religious backgrounds that they're not. So I can totally see that being something where it changes depending on who's taking the pictures, who's interested in the storyline, how photogenic they are. Like if they're cute guys, they're going to be more interesting than like, yep, there's an old woman and her longtime partner, and now they're legally married. No one's going to care about that. You know? Like not as much. They might be amazing, but they're not as photogenic and hugging puppies and things like that.
I don't know. Holland Taylor and Sarah Paulson are a pretty hot couple.
Okay, Sarah Paulson's not that old, so you take that.
Well, I'm just saying, you know.
Holland is older. Holland is older. Yeah, she's amazing, and they are still but they're already celebrities as opposed to people who work for. I'm talking about like if we're talking about politicians. But if you tell me that Nancy Pelosi is now a lesbian, I'm pretty sure that would make headlines. I don't think she is. I'm spitballing here. I'm also trying to get rid of my stripes because I keep getting the light keeps changing on me. So I'm gonna be tiger stripe for the rest of the interview. It's fine. But I loved how you handled all those things with the social media, because I felt like that was really a big key element. And then the politics aspect of it, and then even just the parts of it about watching these people grow who don't really want to be together, but then that whole forced confinement, and it's not quite the only one bed kind of thing, but the fact that they're like, well, we have to make this work, which means we have to kind of get to know each other, even if we don't want to get to know each other. So now we get to know each other, and oh, you're not as horrible as I wanted to make you out in my head.
Yeah. I think it's a relationship between people who might never have been successful in a relationship if it had started in a real way, ironically, because of how they would have approached it. You know, Tom is someone who, and this is something that comes up in the very first chapter, like he treats all his relationships as like, what can they do for him beyond just being a relationship? And Clay has so many kind of expectations about himself and the world that, you know, I think he would have kind of put a lot of pressure on a new relationship that, and this is probably something that's true of a lot of fake dating stories, but like the fact that it's not real gives them that entry point to just get to know each other, like you said, which I love. And and this is bringing back a point you made much earlier in the podcast, but Yeah, I love enemies to lover stories, and I love when they start off as enemies.
Yes.
Nothing is more disappointing to me than when I pick up an enemies to lover story and I open it and like, okay, they start off like sniping at each other, and then you get into one character's head and he's like, but secretly he'd loved her for years. And I'm like,
false. That's misleading.
Well, and
and then they're not enemies. They're just, at least they're superficial enemies, or they are on the surface enemies, but they're not actually enemies. There's no actual animosity in the heart. Maybe just some verbal sniping.
Yeah.
And you didn't have that here. But I would also say, I felt like, for at least from Tom's perspective, he wouldn't say Clay was an enemy. Clay was a nuisance.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
He didn't rise to the importance of even being an enemy. He was
exactly right.
This dude, I've got to deal with this dude. But he didn't really rise to the level where he would think of him like an equal could be an enemy. But Clay could even be an equal to Tom, because he's like, forget you. But I did love the fact that, because you're right, I don't think either one of these men could have managed a relationship without that forced thing, because they both would have found a reason to sabotage it early on. But the fact that they had to stay together because it wasn't their choice in the first place meant they could get past some of those early getting to know you, getting to tolerate being in the same room with you, all of that.
Yeah.
So I love that you were able to do that in a way that felt really natural and realistic, even if it was in a California basement apartment, because we just don't have that.
I'm never gonna. I love those authors who are like put so much research and thought into getting like everything exactly right, and I'm just like, no one will notice.
Well, and I feel like there are different kinds of readers who are bothered by different things.
Right.
And for me, I am not bothered by, oh, you know what? They didn't make this kind of wool coat in the year 1876. It didn't come out till 1878.
Right.
I'm not that kind of reader. I'm the kind of reader who is about how people act, how people's hearts work, what kind of things brains do. And if that realism is there, I can buy dragons, I can buy, time travel. I can buy any of those things if humans are acting the way humans should. And that's when I start getting mad. I won't get into this now, but there was a very, very popular author who had a character acting so counter to how any reasonable human would act. And I just am like, this ruins the story for me. Not all the other stupid twists that come later, but the fact that this person wouldn't act in a way that anyone would act under any circumstances. That's the kind of thing that you did really, really well, because they were always acting the way you would expect humans to act, and to be, even if you didn't like them, even if you were like, ugh, you're gross, or ugh, how are you so selfish? How do you not care about other people? But there are people like that.
Yeah, and we're all like that a little. I sort of think, like, I find unpleasant characters to be very relatable, because they're saying the things that you think in your head and then go, that was a horrible thought I just had, but like, I personally find, those kind of characters very relatable. I was talking to another author about BoJack Horseman and how that was inspiring, like a book that she had worked on. And it was like, those are unpleasant people in that book, but people are unpleasant. Everyone, like, the reason you can relate to that show is because, I don't know, we all have that somewhere deep inside.
Yeah. Well, and getting back to the political things that you were mentioning earlier, not everybody can be Leslie Knope. I mean, like, Ray of Sunshine on a Platter, and we love Leslie Knope and all of that, but most people are not as pure, as hardworking as I mean, she was never Pollyanna-ish, but she was always very much like, if I keep doing the right thing, I can make the world a better place by plugging along. And most people are like, well, can I make the world a better place for me? Right. How can I make this life that I'm living a little bit better for me? And most people are more like that than like Leslie Knope, God rest her fictitious soul. But that's not how most people are. And that's why characters are believable and relatable, because we all have those different flaws that are making us less than perfect humans. And you took some very unperfect humans and made us, well, and you didn't perfect them, but you did give them character growth, which is another thing that I think a lot of times people who put down rom-coms are like, oh, they're just silly and they aren't very realistic. Most of what happened in your book, other than the basement part, was very, very realistic in terms of how the characters interacted and decisions being made. And I don't know how far a real political campaign would go in terms of doing some of these things, because I've never worked for one. So I don't really want to know. And then you hear about some of the ridiculous things and accusations in the news I won't get into any of that. This is not a political podcast, about things that people accuse others of doing or have done. So maybe nothing that Governor Lenny did was ever really outside of the norm for our real politics. But I haven't heard of any fake dates.
Right. I've worked on a few political campaigns. There's never obviously been like a fake dating scenario, but I mean, I think like there was some hair-raising stuff that happens. And I think like the more high, well, I was about to say the higher level the campaign, the more likely the hair-raising scenarios, but actually even at like local small races, possibly because there are fewer people paying attention, like you wonder what kind of crazy stuff goes on.
Well, and I can't throw people under the bus here, but we recently had an election. Everybody did. We recently had an election, and it was a school board election that had some weird stuff going on, and the fallout is still going on, and possibly petitions for recall for a campaign that happened like what, 2 months ago, and we're already looking at pulling people. It's quite a mess, but that's exactly it. Is because it's smaller, you're able to get away with more, or you're at least thinking, well, nobody's really going to follow up on this, and there's not enough oversight to care, so you can actually get away with more blatant violations because you think there's not going to be any up and coming, any kind of comeuppance. Not up and coming. I have that completely backwards in my head. So who knows? And maybe that's the next rom-com. You're right, is political thriller set in the school board. No one wants to do that. But you would probably make it amazing. So I would say go ahead and do it. The two housewives fall in love and didn't expect to. I'd read that. Yeah. If you wrote it, I'd read that. That's fine.
Oh, thank you.
Well, because I mean, I think for me, the number one thing that always matters is the author's voice and how the story is told. So you can take 5 different authors, give them the same plot line, same basic characters, and you'll get 5 different books. And if the author doesn't have the voice that carries the book, there's really no point in reading it. And I loved yours. And was this your debut novel?
This was my debut, yeah.
Was this the first book you've written, or was this the first one you managed to get through the gauntlet?
This was the first one I got through the gauntlet. Yeah, it was not the first one.
Congratulations. Were your prior ones also rom-coms, or were you writing in other genres?
They weren't. So I was writing in fantasy and sci-fi, and I did that for a little while, and eventually I needed a break. And I thought like, I'll write a rom-com. At least I don't have to like invent any magic systems for this. At least I don't have to, well, I mean, some rom-coms do, obviously. But, I was like, I viewed it as a palate cleanser. I viewed it as not something I would like try to get published. Mm-hmm. Wrote it, showed it to my husband. He was like, this is great. I was like, no, it's terrible. Put it away, ignored it. We had one conversation I can remember so clearly where he was like, shouldn't you go back to that rom-com? It was pretty good. And I was like, stop talking to me about that rom-com.
Stop with the rom-com already, dude.
Yeah. But then this is so embarrassing, but over winter break between, I think it was 2018 and 2019, I was looking for something to read and I didn't know what to read and I wasn't in the mood for anything. And I was like, maybe I'll go reread that old, book that I wrote. And it's embarrassing to admit that you like read your own stuff, but whatever. And I opened it and I was like, this is so much better than I thought it was. Like I just had fun reading it. So I worked on it. And then that was the one that made it through the publishing gauntlet. So
I love that so much. And I did not realize that you wrote in other genres. And I'm just going to throw that in the hat of this is how you and I are secretly the same person, because I'm also, like I say, I'm a speculative fiction writer, and I've been on the long path going for those kind of books. And my rom-coms came out first too, and different story. And again, writing it in a place where like, this isn't really what I'm doing, but the whole palate cleanser idea, in my case, I wrote it out of spite, but not against like other books from my own genre, spite against rom-coms or romances or what I thought the genre would be. And I feel like that's the big thing is if people don't really know the genre and they have bad stereotypes or bad experiences with it, or they think it's all 50 Shades of Grey, or they think it's all Twilight. Again, these are different things that kind of the dominant voice is what people think everything else under it is. Yeah. And rom-coms, I love that I read in both these genres, and I read a lot for all the shows that we do. So I don't always have just one genre up, but I do love the idea of the rom-com as the palate cleanser because they're fun. They're usually not super, super long. And because fantasies, I mean, come on, those are usually the chunkiest books out there. And they're like, I have to create an entire world, religion, political system, and dominant class going on here, and possibly a language. So chunky book. Whereas the rom-coms usually are faster, and they're usually ones that don't require you to learn Klingon or, Elvish.
Well, you would hope. There's probably a fair amount.
There really are, but I haven't read those, so that's fair. But I mean, I love that you did that, and I would love to get to see. I don't know if you're still writing in the other genre. You're like, nope, I'm just doing this now. But I would love to get to read your fantasies and things like that. Your spec fic too. Thank
you. Yeah, I am still working on actually my next book that I'm hoping to get off the ground is a speculative romance. So.
Okay, speculative romance. I don't even know if I've ever read a speculative romance. I've read they talk about fantasy romance, but what would you describe as a speculative romance?
Well, maybe speculative romance isn't even the right word. It's kind of maybe more like a high concept romance. I mean, basically the idea is that you have books like Twilight that are paranormal romances, but the paranormal aspect of it is is in the forefront. The stakes of the book are like life and death. There's a lot of like the good guys versus the bad guys. And the romance is a key part of it. In fact, arguably it's like the main part of it, but the paranormal aspect is very, very, very to the forefront. This book is more in the vein of, you may have seen some of these rom-coms coming out in the last few years, like the X-Hex. And
yeah, I haven't read X-Hex, but I've seen it floating around. Yeah.
These are books that are more like, it's almost just a contemporary romance, but there's a little bit of magic, but like the world and the stakes feel very much in the vein of contemporary romance. That's kind of the style of the book that I'm writing now.
Oh, very nice. So it would still feel more like a rom-com, but rom-com for someone who likes that little extra dose of magic.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Okay. Well, and I've had a fantasy, and I don't know if this will ever get published. Long story there. Being able to have something where it's primarily the fantasy, and then there's a romantic subplot, kind of is a different. I wouldn't compare those two at all, because what you were talking about with like the X-Hex, that's very much like a rom-com with a little bit of magic thrown in, versus something where it's definitely more of like, there's a storyline that happens to have romance underneath it. And some of my favorite like science fiction might have great romances. Like if people ever say, who is your couple end goals? I'm like Naomi Nagata and Jim from the Expanse series. And that's not a romance, but I'm like, yes, but it is though. And that's couple end goals there. That's the kind of love you want. But that's not the whole point of the story. It's like, yes, but the protomolecule and the gates and all this stuff. That Halo Scott is saying hello. Hello, Halo. It was great to see you. But that's the kind of thing that I think sets these genres apart. And I think it's really funny because people are like, I don't understand speculative fiction. And everybody who writes speculative fiction says, neither do we, because it's always kind of changing in what fits in it. But I'm sure things like what you're writing would still end up under the rom-com section there at your Barnes and Noble, rather than probably over with the sci-fis and fantasies. I don't know.
Yeah, it's so it's interesting, the dividing line between the two kind of paranormal romances that I was describing. It's almost like how like every cuisine has their own version of like something wrapped in dough and fried. It's like they're the same, but they're different. Yeah, they're the same, but they're different.
That's totally true. Well, and it's funny because it's like, well, there was a children's book in my children's pediatrician office that I loved, and I wanted to take, but we were not supposed to take the books with us, called Everybody Eats Rice, because it's like a global cuisine and everybody has it. And it's like part of so many people's diets that everybody but the Irish, where we're like, we just get potatoes. Sorry, we didn't get rice. But everybody eats rice, but their spin on it is different. And it's in so many different cultures as a staple food, but everybody does it differently. Yeah. Well, we are out of time. I am so glad, Liz, that you could join me today. You were amazing. Thank you so much. If you are listening to this or watching it on the replay, thank you so much for joining us. I apologize for being tiger striped. The sunshine. And I just wanted to say, I listened to Liz's book. It is available to listen. So go ahead. If you are someone who's like, I don't have time to read, listen. I loved the narrator. He was amazing. So you can check it out that way. Or of course it's available, I'm sure, everywhere books are sold, to get it that way. And Liz's website is scrolling below and is in the post for this. So until next time, thank you so much. And next month we have Sarah Cleveland coming on to talk about her fantasies and her fantasy romances. And until next time, see you later. Bye.
Bye.